Now, government's proposed state of disaster over the ongoing load shedding continues to draw mixed reactions. Government says the state of disaster will help speed up its interventions to end the devastating outages. Now, to help us understand if the declaration of the state of disaster will help end blackouts, I'm now joined by Professor Dewald van Niekerk, who is the disaster studies and Professor Mark Swilling, an energy expert. Of course, a very good afternoon to you. Thank you so much for joining us here on Newzroom Afrika. Perhaps let me start with Professor van Niekerk. South Africans are desperate to end load shedding. Of course, it's crippling the economy. The knock-on effects are devastating. Government is under immense pressure to solve this crisis. Do you think a potential state of disaster for energy would be a rational decision?
Good afternoon, Mpho and viewers. It is a very difficult question to answer for the simple reason that the electorate demands action, and one way of receiving that is through the declaration of a national state of disaster. However, if we consider the law, the Disaster Management Act itself and its intent, I'm not utterly convinced that this is the right legislative framework to be used in this instance. If you look at the definition of what a disaster is, although we're talking about man-made, anthropogenic hazards, it falls a bit outside of the scope and the intent of why the Disaster Management Act was created in the first place. And I do get the sense that government is trying to use this piece of legislation to bypass quite a number of regulations or to implement regulations in order to actually mitigate the situation that is self-inflicted and self-created. Now, just on a law perspective, I think there is much more ammunition against using the state of disaster than the other regulations and other frameworks and laws that we have in place that could and should be used in a case like this.
Professor Swilling, let me bring you into the discussion, of course, voicing your thoughts around the impact of this. Would it be a rational decision to make by government?
It will only be a rational decision if it's very, very clear what purpose it's going to serve. So irrespective of the legal framework, whether it's using the Disaster Act or state of emergency legislation or new legislation that they want to push through, what needs to be clarified upfront is why. What's the actual purpose and what are the specific actions that it's going to enable? In a democracy, the electorate is entitled to know what actually needs to be achieved through special regulation. I do agree we're in a disastrous situation. I do agree we have an emergency on our hands, and therefore special measures are definitely needed because we've left it too late. The big decisions haven't been made for the last 20 years. Now we need to fix things quickly, and some kind of emergency action is probably required, but we need to know exactly what and for how long.
Now, Professor van Niekerk, you say that you don't think that it would be a sound decision at this stage. What do you think then, in this desperate situation, could be the alternative?
Well, there's quite enough regulations and processes within government to be doing what they should be doing. To me, this is just a clear lack of governance and management capacity. I get the sense that the different ministries, different departments are not adhering to the requirements and to the instructions that's actually being given to them. If you look at all the other legislation that we have, it is quite clear we should obviously not be in this situation, but to now declare a state of disaster and think we are going to fix the problems that we have, I think it's a bit naive. Also, we must be quite clear and remember, if you provide for a state of disaster, it gives far-reaching power to the ministers and to the president to be doing quite a lot of things without oversight. And this is the problem that I have. I do understand the problem that we're in, but surely there's quite a lot of other legislation and regulations that we can use and enforce to be able to better and to mitigate this situation. Using a state of disaster and using emergency law to be doing normal governance aspects is a slippery slope. And this is contrary to what the Disaster Management Act is there for, and it's, in my sense, undemocratic to be going down this route. Why can't the ministers and the president instruct their different ministries to be doing the right thing? If red tape is the issue, why don't we cut it? Why do you need a state of disaster to be doing this? I think this is a way of the ANC to centralize powers and to make decisions that falls outside the scope of parliamentary oversight. And this, in my mind, is a very, very difficult situation for a democracy like South Africa.
Professor Swilling, just speaking to that, as Professor Niekerk speaks about the far-reaching powers to government, I suppose it speaks about trust. It speaks about the state of disaster requiring some form of social compact. And looking at what happened with the pandemic, COVID-19, trust was a big factor there, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, I mean, what's interesting is that quite a number of people who supported the idea of an emergency 6, 7, 8 months ago are pulling back. And they're pulling back because of the collapse of trust. So if you, in your insert, the president said the Lekgotla mandated the president to coordinate the response to the energy crisis. In other words, not the Minister for Mineral Resources and Energy. And that is quite a significant statement, and it does imply centralization because there are significant bureaucratic complexities and incoherencies that make it extremely difficult for Eskom to do the kinds of emergency repairs and deep, longer-term repairs that are required to get the electricity generation units back on track. And you know, there's no time to go into the mind-boggling complexities involved. And I think what the positive thing that could come out of this is to say to the nation, trust us to make specific interventions, to list them. These are the 6 key interventions. Get the diesel. Empower the station managers to procure the spares that they require. Cut through some of the regulations so that you can build power stations. And if on that list we have car power ships, then don't trust them.
And that's, of course, a really important part of it, of course, just considering some of the decisions that have been made. You say that it's important to iron out a plan. Perhaps, Professor Van Niekerk, in ironing out this plan, I mean, you've spoken to how we shouldn't be in this situation, but if we're going to go ahead with the state of disaster, declaring the state of disaster, Professor Swilling says it's important to know what the end goal is. What are you hoping to achieve and how are you going to do it? What are your thoughts around that? Should a plan, happen to now be put in place? And considering how we've heard so much about the plan and seen very little in terms of implementation, how does this bode now with the nation which is under some discomfort and panic around this potential decision?
Well, Mpo, I thought we had a plan, to be honest. Around about middle of last year, the National Energy Crisis Committee, if I remember correctly, was established. They have a few points dotted down. This is what we are going to do. This is how we're going to address the crisis, which I thought was very noble and it makes absolutely sense. I'm not an energy expert. Prof. Swilling can comment on that, but it made sense. Now we found ourselves in a situation where they can't implement this because of their own state mechanism. Now, it's like being a parent, you put down certain rules in your house, but you can't enforce it yourself. This is where we find ourselves currently. Why can't we cut through this red tape? Why is the mechanism so cumbersome? And we now sit in a situation where the ANC is actually acknowledging the fact that they have almost a failed state. They now need to revert to something like a state of disaster just to get normal day-to-day operations going. And this, to me, doesn't make sense. If I have to look at the long-term prospect, Prof. Swilling said we need to have a plan. It needs to be linked to a definite time frame. Now, the Disaster Management Act as an instrument provides for a state of disaster for 3 months. After that, we can renew it on a month-to-month basis. We're quite aware of this coming out of COVID. Now the ANC, as a political party, calls for a state of disaster and they say it's going to be for 11 months. This goes against anything that we're trying to do and achieve through scientific disaster risk reduction. So they're preempting a period of crisis and they're saying this is 11 months. Now the other area that concerns me is what happens after that. If they keep on renewing a state of disaster because to fix this problem in 11 months, honestly, I don't see this happening. Now we're going to an election year. How will they use the state of disaster to influence an election year? I don't think this is just a question of pure energy. Yes, we're in a crisis when it comes to the energy, but I think there's far-reaching other things underlying to this decision which drives this thing of let's get a state of disaster going again. And I don't think that is the right way to go.
Absolutely. Professor Swilling, you were talking about car powership and looking at the state of disaster, the potential state of disaster. Could it be the potential key for the deal?
It definitely could be used to force through the deal. That is the concern of many people. There is a role for emergency gas supply of the kind that car power ships can provide, but for an absolute maximum of 5 years. Nothing more than that. Don't forget, when you contract car power ships, they give you the gas and they disappear after that. There's no infrastructure. All the infrastructure, everything that you require for ongoing energy management is gone, sails off into the sunset, and you're paying in dollars. And the dollar price of gas is very volatile in the context of geopolitical uncertainties around the world. So why do we want to hook our economy to volatile gas prices paid in dollars, and in the end we are left with nothing? So there are smarter ways and much cheaper ways to solve that problem.
Welcome back. Thanks for staying with us as we continue our discussion around government's proposed state of disaster over the ongoing load shedding, which continues to draw mixed reaction. I am in discussion with Professor Dewald van Niekerk, who is the head of the African Center for Disaster Studies at the Northwest University, as well as Professor Mark Swilling, who's an energy expert. Perhaps, Professor Swilling, as the discussions and the panic or perhaps discomfort around the proposal of this decision is taking place, we also know that Eskom has now placed an advertisement to replace its outgoing CEO, Andre de Ruyter. When it comes to CEOs, I mean, whoever steps in will be the 12th CEO Eskom has seen. What do you think are some of the important requirements and skill set and qualifications that will be needed for a CEO who's stepping in at a time like this to deal with the crisis?
Well, the first thing we need to ask is who would want this job? It's the current CEO nearly lost his life through poisoning, and we're the only country in the world where the Minister for Mineral Resources and Energy accused the CEO of a publicly owned utility of treason. So, you know, the risks for anybody are extremely high, personally, family-wise, and professionally. So what I would say, whoever we get, whether it's a lawyer or an engineer or a business guy, it doesn't matter what it is, that person needs to come in and specify exactly what the agreed targets are, and then request that he or she, together with the Eskom team, is allowed to get the job done without interference. The big problem was, over the many years, if you look back, is the interference, the political interference in the decisions of an effective professional team. And that must not be replayed in future.
Yeah. Professor van Niekerk, what are your thoughts around the 12th CEO who will be stepping in?
Very, very similar. I think good luck to whoever receives that or takes up that position. I think they find themselves between a severe rock and a hard place. And Professor Swilling rightfully said, in order to function, they must cut away all the political interference. Which is a bit ironic if we look at the topic under discussion, which is a state of disaster, which is extremely politicized. It's driven by the political cadres. So I think for the ANC to probably just deploy and one of their cadres, just deploy someone that toes the party line, is probably going to be much easier, because it's clear that government are extremely clueless on what to do with Eskom in any case. Whoever takes up that position, I don't think they're going to make any difference whatsoever.
It could be, you say that, but at the same time, we know that a lot is at stake. All eyes, you made mention of what would happen come 2024 and, what's happening at the moment, heading to 2024, and, of course, looking at the politics of it all. Don't you think that whoever is placed in the position will need to be someone that the ANC or government can convince the nation that this person is indeed the right person doing a good job and solving this issue? Because at the end of it all, South Africans just want the lights on.
Sure, but did the previous CEO not do that? I think he instilled quite a lot of confidence when he took over in the first place. I thought we were on a winning wicket here. But once again, with political immingling and all the other nasties that goes with being the CEO of Eskom, drove him away. So it's a very difficult question to answer. Who would this person be? Should we go fish in another pond? Should we appoint someone from outside of the country that can be doing this? It's a very difficult question to answer. I don't think anyone that calls himself a South African would probably be safe in that position because there's too much vested interest in all of this. So maybe the right decision would be get someone from outside that is fairly neutral, that could be assumed to be neutral, and that can work with a state mechanism. But who the superhuman being would be.
Professor Swilling, let me perhaps come to you. We know that on Thursday, the President Cyril Ramaphosa will be delivering the State of the Nation address, and a lot of the conversation, of course, has centered around what South Africans want to hear around load shedding, solutions to it. We have sort of heard a lot of it throughout the past few years and the promises. And, of course, when the President takes to the podium, what more can he say about the situation?
Well, and there's a difference, I think, between what he can say and what he should say. I think what he can say is severely constrained by the politics of the moment, which is very clearly since the ANC electoral conference, there's lots and lots in December, there's lots and lots of indications the ANC has suddenly realized that Eskom can lose them the election in 24. In other words, and for the ANC, losing means getting less than a 50% majority. So there's a heavy focus on sorting this out as part of the electoral campaign. What he should say is that yes, the president is going to take responsibility. The National Electricity Committee is going to be empowered with a secretariat to get things done. And most importantly of all, he needs to, on behalf of the nation, build trust in Eskom, build trust between Eskom and industry, and with the financial institutions in our country. Trust is broken down between all of these players, and so very little can actually get done. And then putting politicians in there to try and manage things doesn't help. What you need is a neutral facilitator who is seen as neutral, is seen as highly competent, who can facilitate a dialogue between these players in order to get into a creative, bold, problem-solving mode. It's not going to work saying, trust me, I'm the president, I'm going to crisis manage ourselves out of this mess. I don't think that's going to work.
And very lastly, Professor Niekerk, your take on what the president could or should say come State of the Nation address?
No, I totally agree with Professor Swilling. That what we need is action. The only way government can return trust or receive trust again is if we see decisive action. Now, if you remember back when the president first had that family meeting with all the ministers, they had to give feedback during the COVID pandemic. That was a moment in history that was wasted by the ANC, because after that everything just went south. If he can instill trust again by showing that the ministers are actually doing something and we can see it at grassroots level, they will instill trust again. But by just talking the whole time, we're not getting anywhere. Nobody's keeping the lights on with talking. We need to see decisive action linked to whatever he's going to say. And that's the only way I can see people trusting government again.
Yeah. Very well. Gentlemen, thank you so much. Let me thank you for your time and weighing in on this very important discussion. Leaving it there for now, Professor Dewald van Niekerk, who's the head of African Center for Disaster Studies at the Northwest University, and of course wrapping up Professor Mark Swilling, an energy expert. Thank you for your time.